Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining today's DreamWakers Daily Conversation. This week, our chats are themed around resilience. Today, we're speaking with Arpan Somani, formerly a product marketing manager at SoundCloud, and who's now part of the business development team at Codecademy. Arpan, it's such a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer our students' questions today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I guess we'll just jump right into it. I would love to start off by hearing what exactly business development means and how did you get drawn to this job?
Cool. Yeah, that's a great question. So, business development is one of those terms that gets thrown around, I think, sometimes. And, it's the definition is really in the name. It's developing the business. So, at a lot of companies, specifically for me, my role in business development has been focused on partnerships, sales, anything that helps sort of drive the revenue goals of the company. But typically, business development ends up touching on so many different aspects and being a very cross-functional role. So that means that I might still be working, to meet certain monetary goals, but working really closely with our marketing teams or our PR teams or even the legal teams if they need to negotiate a contract with a partner that's going to help us get more money or something like that. So, in a sense, business development is really just focusing on that revenue, but finding interesting ways to meet those goals.
Okay, cool. And how did you find yourself in this role?
Another great question. Yeah. So my background was really in kind of sales and brand partnerships, which in a sense is a form of business development, I would say. And then at SoundCloud, I transitioned from doing brand partnerships and sales to a product marketing role, really understanding how the product impacts the business and how we can speak to our customers and talk to them about the product. And I kind of saw this opportunity at Codecademy to bring those two worlds together and really think about how can I help work on a product that also drives these revenue goals through partnerships, and how can those partnerships, kind of in the reverse way, help affect the product and help that grow as well.
Got it. Okay, so sort of like you just mentioned, you just started at Codecademy a couple days ago, so thank you. I know we're going to try not to push you too hard on what you do there since it's brand new. But you worked at SoundCloud prior to that, and you've had a few other jobs in management and marketing. So just thinking more broadly about like a career path, how do you make decisions about what the next step is or how to get started in a career? Like, what did that look like for you?
Definitely, yeah. So in terms of figuring out the next step or deciding, when is it time to move on or look for something new, my rule of thumb has generally been, I think a lot of people would say this is, at what point do you feel like you're not learning enough? I think you're always going to be learning, but there is a point where you wake up and you're doing your job and you're like, wow, I'm really comfortable, or I really know how to do this. And that can feel really good at first, but then after a while you realize, should I be comfortable right now? Should I feel like I could wake up and kind of do this with one hand tied behind my back? Not really. For me personally, I want to constantly be challenged and learn something new. And I think for this specific transition that I've made, going from the music industry to now the education technology space, the e-learning space, a big part of it for me was I started my search thinking, okay, I want to stay in music. I'm going to look for other opportunities. And I kept facing that same feeling of like, well, I could go here, but I don't think I would learn something so differently or so drastically different from what I was doing at SoundCloud. So making a career shift and an industry shift within my career felt like the right move to really push myself and get out of my comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great piece of advice, and like I've always had people say, like if you're bored, you're probably not pushing yourself enough, and then it's time for a change. It's a good rule of thumb. So our theme this week, like I mentioned, is resilience, and we're talking about what that means. And I'd love to just know what it means to you, and what's a big challenge that you've had to overcome, and did that make you more resilient?
Yeah, resilience for me, and I was knowing that was the theme for the week. I was really thinking about that a lot the last few days, and I think resilience is under the face of pressure or outside forces, maybe saying no or not necessarily opening up the doors for you in the way that you want. Resilience is the idea of staying true to a path that you know is right for you. Not necessarily a path that's right. I wouldn't say that. I think it's understanding that success and that your career journey needs to be right for you. And you're really the only person who can define that for yourself. And so you might go through your career or your education with this idea in mind of like, this is really what I want to do. And I know this is right for me. This is what's going to bring me happiness and success. And there might be a lot of factors that are kind of against that. For me, early in my career, working in music was a really, really big part of that idea of what's going to be right for me. And unfortunately, my parents and my family were not so much on board with that. They were like, nope, you got to go into a more traditional path. You should go into like engineering or become a doctor or study science or something like that. And I knew deep down inside, I was like, I could do some of that stuff, but I don't know if I will end up being happy doing that. So kind of against those external pressures of family and maybe even what other people in my life were telling me, I knew what I wanted, and I knew that that was what success was going to mean for me, and it was going to mean the most for me. And so I, went full force ahead on trying to figure out how can I get to that point. And the other aspect that I like to think about when I'm thinking about resilience is also, you might have an idea of this end goal and how you're going to get there. And inevitably, it is going to change. The path that you take is going to change no matter how much you've planned it out. And resilience is also being able to go with that flow a little bit. When things change or plans change or the world changes, I mean, look at where we are today, right? When the world changes and things aren't in your control, resilience is knowing that you can still get to that point of success, but you might just have to shift your thinking a little bit or your approach to things. But it's still keeping that end goal of, hey, how can I find success or happiness for me? How can I find that? It's staying true to that.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea. I'm picturing like there's like point A and then there's an end point, but it might not be a straight line. And resilience is sort of navigating whatever
is never a straight line,
comes at you.
right?
Yeah, that's great. Well, so transitioning a little further back in your career, we read that you used to be a DJ for WNYU, New York University's school radio station. And we want to know what it's like to produce a radio show. Do you have any memorable interviews, something that you loved about that job?
Yeah, producing a radio show was really, really fun, especially, having the opportunity to do it in New York City and being on the radio airwaves in New York City, 89.1 FM, WNYU.org. Shout out my alumni plug. It was really, really fun, but it was also a lot of work. I mean, we had a kind of like what they call like a public mandate to be an educational radio platform. So we weren't allowed to play anything that's on top 40 radio, nothing really mainstream. Our directive was educate listeners and show them and explain to them new music or music that they wouldn't have heard elsewhere on the radio. And so that was a really interesting challenge because it just meant, you had to really dig deep and do your research and find things that people didn't know about, and then also educate yourself on it so that you could talk about it on the air. And it was really exciting. I think it opened up my world and my lens to a whole, other subset of music that you wouldn't hear on the radio or that doesn't always get covered on the blogs or on the internet or shared on social media. And there's tons of music out there today more so than ever, but in the history of time. And we had a really incredible library of music in the station itself with like vinyl records and cassette tapes. And I think there were some old formats that I don't even know how we would have played them on the air, but those were in the station as well. So producing it was a lot of fun. Once you're on the air and you get over sort of the nervousness of like, wow, I'm on the radio right now and there could be one person listening to me or there could be hundreds of people listening to me. And unfortunately with radio, you can't look at an app and see how many eyeballs are viewing it. Similar to like, I think in the corner, I don't know if I'm pointing to the right corner of this Facebook Live, but you can't see how many people are listening, but you have to just assume that, there's people with an appetite for it. So in terms of interviews and shows, I don't know if people, because of how underground we had to be sometimes, I don't know if anyone here would have heard of it, but I got a chance to interview this really, really awesome band called Hiatus Coyote. They're like a funk and soul group that's worked a lot in like the hip hop space as well. I interviewed this like DJ and producer named Dame Funk. For context, my show was a funk and soul show called Funkonomics with Boogie Smalls. That's me. But yeah, it was really interesting, and I think some of those relationships that I've made with some of those artists have continued since then. When they're in town, they'll hit me up, or I'll see that they have a show and I'll go, check them out and say what's up again. And that's been really cool too, because you spend some time with these people in a booth that's like maybe 7 feet by 7 feet, 10 by 10, and you really get to know them. And while the music's playing, you get to continue having those conversations and being really casual with them and making them feel comfortable on the air as well.
That's so cool, Boogie Smalls. So how has music played a role in your entire life? I mean, growing up and all of that, and do you have any favorite artists or music that kind of resonated with you throughout your life and career?
Yeah, music's always been kind of a big part of my life. My parents had both me and my brother started pretty early playing instruments, so I grew up playing piano for a couple years. Didn't love it, but it gave me like a cool musical foundation to understand music theory and to be able to play other instruments. And in fourth grade, I ended up picking up the saxophone, and I ended up playing sax through the rest of my schooling career, and I played in jazz band, I played in marching band, I played in pit orchestra, and then I even started my own ska band in high school. I don't even know if kids know what ska is today, but
Google it.
yeah. And that was really, really fun. And so music has always been kind of at my core, but I knew it was not something I wanted to pursue in terms of making music as a career. It was always something really fun to do, but that's why I really sought out a career in music, so that I could be around it and bring that passion into a form where I could make a living off of it without relying necessarily on trying to be the best at saxophone, which I knew I wasn't ever the best at. And even now, making this career transition, one of the interesting things that I noticed just in the last few weeks that I had between these two jobs is, after leaving the music industry professionally, I rediscovered what active listening is again. And I think that term, sometimes get thrown around for reading, active reading, where you really you're just focused on that task. So oftentimes we listen to music when we're cleaning, or when we're doing our homework, or we're studying, or we're working out. And there's something that gets lost there. So what I sort of rediscovered in these last few weeks, and I forgot about it, honestly, since maybe my radio show days, is that you can just sit, for a couple hours and listen to music and really think about the lyrics and think about the music, and you digest it in a very different way, and it sits with you in a very different way. And so I think rediscovering that's something I want to continue trying to do and making time for, and maybe setting aside an hour or two every couple of days to really just listen to music, and see what that does. Kind of like a form of meditation in a way.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the last time I just sat and listened to music. So which album? You can only pick one. What album do I have to listen to?
Oh God. Okay.
I know it's a very unfair question. I'm sorry.
It is an unfair question. Here's where I'm going to do a shameless plug, though. Okay. So I do work with an artist on the management side, and this is where I'm going to tell all of you listening to go check him out. His name is Jachary, Jachary. It's future funk, R&B, soul kind of stuff. But we have some new music coming out soon, so keep an eye out. I would definitely recommend that. But there's a couple things that have come out in the last few weeks that I've really been listening to. There's a new album from a guy named Tom Misch. That's been really, really fun to listen to. It's kind of like jazz meets electronic music in a way. Yeji, who's a really cool producer, Yaeji, put out a mixtape a couple weeks ago. That's been super, super fun to listen to. I'm always hungry for new stuff, so I feel like if you ask me this in a week, I'll have a whole different set of things that I'll tell you that I've been listening to on repeat.
Okay, we'll have you back for an update in a few
Yeah.
weeks. Awesome, that's a great place to start. So kind of back to when you were alluding to, you know, this idea of having a goal in mind, but maybe that's not always what other people have in mind. So how did you sort of navigate this idea of wanting to work in the music world, not necessarily as a musician, but coming up against people who didn't necessarily support that dream or that desire of yours?
Yeah, I think one thing that I had to learn also was, understanding what opportunities in the music industry meant. And I quickly learned, and I think it's becoming more so like this, is that tech and music are coming together in really powerful ways. And you see that with, I feel like if you think about what apps you use to listen to music, you're thinking about SoundCloud or Spotify or Apple Music. These are all tech forward companies. And because of that, there's so many different ways to get into the industry. I started working in music professionally doing brand partnerships and sales. That is not what I thought I would end up doing. And it's kind of like what we were talking about. It's like that was maybe point C along the way to get to the music industry, but it's not the direction I thought it was going to go in. But what I really did, and part of the way that I convinced some of the naysayers in my life and the people who weren't necessarily, I don't want to say unsupportive, but they didn't understand my vision necessarily, was finding out and showing them that, hey, I can study business and marketing and apply those skills to the industry that I'm really passionate about. Working in music doesn't necessarily mean you have to study music. It means, you could be studying marketing, or you could be studying PR or finance, or, because of, what I was saying, everything being kind of intertwined with tech, you could study coding. You could take a class on Codecademy. You can, you can find ways to bring your passion, which is sometimes very different from the skill sets that you want to develop. And I think, you work hard enough and you can look for those opportunities and keep flipping rocks to see what's underneath. And it may not be your first job. It may not be your second job, right? It's you don't know how many stops you're going to have to take to get to that kind of quote unquote end goal that you're looking for, which, mind you, I thought music was my end goal. I'm no longer working in music. So that end goal is always moving as well. But, I think that's the way to do it. That's the way to really find success and figure out where or what industry really interests you, and then figure out separately what skills do you want to develop. And there's tons of opportunity out there to bring those two together.
This is actually a perfect lead-in to what might be sort of a difficult question, because you just touched on this, but we had a high schooler in Ohio who is interested in the music industry, and we hear that a lot from a lot of students. Like, I want to work in music, and they wanted to know if you had any insider tips or what skills or classes they should hone if that's what they want to focus on.
Yeah, and I think it's back to what I was just saying. It depends on what interests you, because the music industry is just like any other industry. We had at SoundCloud a finance team. We had a legal team, a bunch of lawyers who worked, in the music industry at SoundCloud. We had product people. We had engineering people, software engineering people. We had folks like me who had more of a background in marketing and sales. We had a whole marketing team. So, I think part of what helped me sort of land within the music industry is developing those skills to be applied in potentially any industry, but then focusing some of my extracurricular activities or really my network too, and building relationships with people who exist in that industry. And there's a lot of different ways to build those relationships. For me, I was lucky enough to be going to school in New York City, where there's, kind of, it's one of the hearts of the industry, right? New York and LA. So I would go to concerts and I'd start talking to random people, and, you'd start finding networking opportunities there. Today, okay, concerts aren't really happening in that way, right? So we got to figure out other ways that you can network. And I think LinkedIn and finding people's email and even messaging people on social media is a good way to do it. But I want to caveat that you really need to be thoughtful when you're doing that kind of outreach, right? You can't be spamming people on these channels being like, hey, I really want to work in the industry. Like, how can I get a job? You should really do your research. Think about who you're asking. Go on LinkedIn, maybe look up the companies that you're really interested in, look up a couple names or see what jobs they're doing, and figure out how you can kind of get in with those people by asking the right questions. So maybe you don't really understand how royalties work in the music industry. Maybe you can find somebody who works at a SoundCloud or a Spotify and their job description is royalties and reporting. Send them a note and say, hey, I'm a student and I'm really interested in learning more. I don't know where to start or where to find the resources. Would you be open to talking for 30 minutes? And what you'll find is more often than not, people really do want to share this kind of information, but they just want to do it with people, or they want to respond to people who they think are genuinely interested in understanding this stuff. Even if, in the back of your head, you're like, I'm doing this so that I can eventually get a job, that's fine. Everyone understands that. But I'm not going to respond necessarily to a message of somebody being like, how do I get a job in the music industry, versus somebody who says, oh, I noticed that you did X, Y, and Z, or you went to this school. I'm really interested in that. Would you be open to talking about it? Or here's a couple questions I have that are specific. And make sure you spell people's names right when you do that research. The amount of times I get LinkedIn requests when people spell my name wrong, I'm like, it's right there. That just shows me like you didn't do your research, even the bare bones. So do your research, be thoughtful, and be human also, right? You're talking to other humans, and we all just want to, help each other, but we want to be thoughtful and caring about that as well.
Yeah, all of those were really amazing tips, and I hope that's helpful to all of our, especially older students who are kind of navigating that arena right now. So thinking back on younger you, do you have any pieces of advice you would go back and tell yourself, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think this is it's a good summary of what I've been saying today in general, but there are an infinite number of ways to think about what success and happiness means for you. And I think high school me really thought there was only one way. It was like, oh, I have to make a lot of money, or I have to work in a very respected position or industry or something like that. And looking back, I've met so many people in my life since high school who have not gone down, necessarily a traditional path, and yet they seem like some of the happiest people I've ever met. So really opening yourself up to the possibility that, what works for somebody else and makes them happy might not be the right path for you. And figuring out what is the right path for you is it's an endless quest, right? We're going to constantly do it, but that's okay, right? Like that evolution, that constant change is part of that path. It's part of that journey. And so, yeah, I would say, just open your mind a little bit to what makes you happy and how you can find success, and know that there's an infinite number of ways to describe and illustrate success.
Yeah, that's amazing. So obviously we're living in kind of a crazy time. I mean, this has been hard on a lot of people. And we're talking, it's Resilience Week. We're talking about what that looks like. So can you talk a little bit about what it's been like for you, this transition? I mean, obviously for you, you've had a transition not only into a pandemic, but also into a new job, being at home, all of those sorts of things. Like, what are some ways you cope? How has that transition looked in your life?
Yeah. I am lucky enough to be quarantined and staying at home with my girlfriend. And that has been really, really fun. We've just been, finding interesting ways to stay busy, whether it's working on puzzles, whether it's playing games, whether it's video chatting with our families. We have a cat. I don't know if you guys can see him, but he's sitting in the corner over there. He keeps us pretty busy too. We love him. His name is Mushu. I mentioned this before, but I've been, taking time to really just listen to music, kind of sit in the corner with my headphones on and listen to music. And then, of course, binge watching TV. I've been playing a lot of Xbox. You can add me. My gamer tag is the Arpan, TheArpan. And I've also used this time to, and I think a lot of people are saying this, but to reconnect with people, and to even, people who I see on a regular basis, to spend a little bit more concentrated time talking to them, because we can't necessarily do everything based on an activity. We can't say, oh, we're going to go to the movies today, or we're going to go play soccer or basketball. Instead, we just talk. And it's been really kind of refreshing to remember that that's how you became friends with some of these people in the first place, is just by sitting around and talking and doing nothing. So that's been, I think, how we're coping. And thinking about it day by day has been really important. If you start thinking too far in the future, we don't really know what's going to happen or what could happen. So, instead of letting that overwhelm you, it's about, how can I get through this next day, or how do I keep myself busy or focused? And, some of that time I think can be spent on thinking, maybe I should make that painting I've always thought about making, or read that book I've always thought about reading. But my girlfriend, I really owe it to her to point out, she's been a really good constant reminder that, like, don't put that pressure on yourself either, though. Some of this time could just be spent doing nothing. That's okay too. Spending some time for yourself is totally okay. And you don't always have to feel like, oh, I have all this time, I should be doing something like more or being more productive. I mean, this is unprecedented time for everyone, so nobody needs to put that pressure on themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Take it day by day.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're running low on time, so we've come to our very last question, which is just about how to wrap up this conversation. Do you have one or two things that you hope students get from this and take with them from this talk today?
Yeah, and I think I said it already, but I can't stress enough, like, there's so many ways to live, and there's so many ways to find happiness, and there's so many paths that'll get you there. Find the one that you feel is right for you right now and explore it. Pull on those threads, even if people around you might be saying, it's not worth it, or there's no money to be made there. Doesn't mean you can't explore it. You can't pull the thread and see. And who knows, maybe you might pull it and you may realize at the end of that thread, you're like, actually, you know what? That's not for me. I don't really want to do that. But at least you can look back and say, I looked into it. I explored it. I did my research. And yeah, and like I said earlier, if you're interested in a specific industry, and it's not just music, any industry, do your research. Find the right people to talk to, and don't be disheartened if somebody says no, or if they don't get back to you, because there's tons of other people to ask. And, you might end up asking me, and I'm more than happy to talk with anyone. So just be thoughtful, and yeah, I think resilience is important. Not just resilience in terms of people saying no, or you getting rejected from a school or a job that you really want, but resilience in knowing that the end goal for you might be changing, and the way you get there might change, and that's all okay. This is how life works, and this is how we get to where we're going. As cliche as that sounds, but
I think that's fantastic advice for someone of any age, not even just students. That's so great. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Arpan, for your time today and for sharing with us. And thanks to everyone else for joining us here on our DreamWakers Daily Conversation. You can tune in every day at 1 p.m. Eastern for all of our conversations, and they will be here on our Facebook page and also on YouTube, so you can look for that link in the comments. So I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for having me. Bye.